Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can now.
Great.
How do I sound? Because I'm trying. Do I sound okay?
Yeah, I mean, you sound clear. It's not fuzzy.
Because every time,
volume up a little bit.
Have you seen in the news where there's a new trend of like Zoom plastic surgery because people don't like how they look on Zoom?
No, is there?
Not with me.
Background.
For me, it's my voice. Like when I hear my recording and I do intros like for the podcast, and I'm like, because I've done speaking before, and I was told I have a really good voice, and I did stand up comedy, same thing, and then I hear myself. Yeah, and then I hear myself. I'm like, what are they talking about? So I don't know. I think I sound. Huh?
Oh, I was gonna say I listened to your podcast last night with the shoulder guy. I thought it sounded good. I mean, the quality sounds like you're as good as every other podcast host. Obviously, when you have someone over Zoom, they sound a little muffled, but I could hear everything.
Cool. I haven't listened. I haven't checked. I'm afraid to like look at any reviews, but I've gotten some feedback. Actually, the second podcast I did with a double amputee, he chose to have his legs removed just because he had I can't pronounce the disease he had, but it affects your lower limbs. And so he just couldn't take it anymore. And now he runs triathlons, did an Ironman, all those things. And I got a friend request or whatever follow today on Instagram, and he messaged me, and there's the guy, Sydney, the amputee, is part of this organization called Disabled Outdoorsmen. And they took this guy, the guy who messaged me, they took his daughter. She was their first hunt, and she's in a wheelchair and all. It's called his
daughter's in a wheelchair. Oh no, this is another girl.
Yeah, the guy who messaged me because he heard Sydney's, he heard the podcast I did with Sydney. I talked about his daughter because there's a video on YouTube that the Disabled Outdoorsman did with her hunt, and it was I mean, not heartbreaking. It's just the joy in her face, her voice, her tears to be able to go hunting, because she'd always wanted to go, was just priceless. And her father messaged me today and said, "Yeah, I'm her dad," and we were chatting a little bit on Instagram, so it's pretty cool. And he said, "I loved your podcast," and I was like, "Okay, cool." So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's crazy. I actually just I set up a game damage hunt for elk, really small hunt, like 8 hunters. And one of the ones I randomly selected, he has ALS, and he uses like this off-trail trike. I honestly don't know what it is. I haven't really heard of it. But he was asking because the landowner's pretty concerned about, they don't let people drive up to the pasture just because of weeds and spreading all kinds of crap and then ruts in the road and all that kind of stuff. But they were going to let him go up there, like drive him up in his trike and let him do the rest of it because there's not that much snow. But I'll be interested to follow up with him. He's going to go next Monday and Tuesday, I think, are his days. But yeah, it was frustrating because he was like, "Yeah, I want to go. It has to be need to be able to ride my trike up there." It's like, well, hope it works out. But that's the neat thing with, I mean, even with some of the bow technology, aside from just, your actual getting from A to B, which is a huge advantage if you need a wheelchair, but being able to open the opportunity to folks that never thought they could do stuff like that. Like, I'm daddy's girl, so hearing that story about the little girl getting to go hunt, like, that gets right to me. That's awesome. That's
I forget the name, but it's something Disabled Outdoorsman Angels. Yeah, her name is Angel, and it's really touching. Yeah. So you ready to get this started?
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, so everyone, I'm speaking with Julie Golla, right? Last name's Golla?
Yeah.
Okay. And what's your exact title? I don't want to I know you're a wildlife biologist, but what would your exact cut up for the state of Montana?
Sure. So I work for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks as an area wildlife biologist. So I do basically all the big game species, elk, bighorn sheep, mountain lions, black bear. Those are all kind of under my regime as far as doing population surveys and then opening up hunting opportunities where we can for those.
Okay. So you came on because we're going to talk about a big topic that's very controversial among outdoorsmen, and that is wolves. And you happen to have a little bit of knowledge in your head about the animals. And so the one thing that I have heard a lot about wolves, and we talked about this, is that people say they just kill indiscriminately for no reason and then just leave the carcasses. And so we talked about this, and that kill in Wyoming, was it like 12 or something elk got killed, surplus killing, I guess they call it.
Yeah, that's something we do hear a lot about. And those circumstances when hunters or landowners or whoever comes across an abandoned carcass, especially when you can see wolf tracks all around it, it's very infuriating for a lot of folks. Especially we start seeing a lot more wolf kills around December and January around here. Obviously the bull elk are really fatigued. They're coming out of the rut. They've given it their all, and they've historically been a prey target for wolves across the US where they do overlap with elk. And the thing with wolves, even if you find a carcass that has looked abandoned, it's probably not abandoned. They'll come in and they'll eat, 15 to 20 pounds of meat in one sitting, and then they'll go off and sleep it off and might not eat until 1 or 2 days later. Another thing that can happen, certainly requires grizzly bears and wolves from overlapping, but wolves can basically get pushed off their kill sites by bigger predators if they don't want to deal with that competition. Certainly you see some of those videos in Yellowstone, a place that's actually, you can watch some of this behavior, and there's certainly a tug and pull there. But yeah, everything's circumstantial. I know of a story in Idaho where I forget how many sheep it was, but the wolves were depredating on these sheep in southern Idaho and pushed them off a cliff, ran them off a cliff, and I think up to 20 sheep or something died at once. That's not to say that, when people find multiple elk dead in one area, that's what happened. But when I worked, so I've worked in multiple states with wolves, one of which being Idaho, the other was Arizona and New Mexico. People may have heard about the Mexican wolf project, which is this subspecies, and it's been this big federal reintroduction thing for the last decade. And an interesting thing they found out with studies, so they would actually do flights to find kill sites, and a certain pack had a technique where they would just run this herd about once a week of elk into the same bowl where they could corner them, and they would make kill after kill after kill once a week. So it's another scenario where, over the winter there could be 8 different elk carcasses there, but they were killed across 2 months. So that's another thing. I can imagine coming across a scene like that and feeling like, this just looks too easy. This looks like fun. So I think there are certain environmental indicators that can make it look like wolves are killing for sport. I mean, and when it comes down to it, maybe every now and then they do make a kill and then move on. Wolves are really good at what they do. They're absolutely make an impact on ecosystems, as we've seen in Yellowstone, and any places where they've recovered, it becomes a whole other factor in big game management when it comes to elk and deer and even bighorn sheep. But for the most part, I wouldn't consider wolves just out there for the sport. It's really tough to be a wolf, and you've got people chasing you and you've got other wolves trying to take you down. My overall experience with seeing them in the field is they're really good at killing, and mostly they do it for needs and not so much just because they can.
You mentioned that it's a hard job they have, and I was reading an article about how their success rate isn't that good. It's like 4%, where a pack or I don't know what you call a pride of lions is around 30%. So,
Sure.
yeah, so they got to work a little harder. But you talked about that in Mexico or New Mexico, the Mexican wolves where they take the bull to a bowl. So that's like a learned. That's like a learned behavior, right? I've seen where orcas do the same thing wherever they are on planet Earth and whatever part of the ocean. They are adapted to that area and know how to kill specific animals certain ways. Like in somewhere in New Zealand or Australia, they take the stingray and they'll flip it on its back because it's it's a shark technically, and it becomes that taconic state, or whatever they call it. And they've learned that was the behavior they learned. So the wolves, they obviously, their methods of killing sometimes is like where they trap those elk in that bowl. That's obviously,
and that's just one example. I mean, clearly you can't follow every wolf or every wolf pack, but it's been shown that they can do that. Another interesting thing, so I manage a big wildlife management area called Spotted Dog up by Deer Lodge, Montana. And it was a historic ranch. First, it was a sheep herding landscape, and then later on it became cattle for a big cattle operation, and then the state purchased it for elk winter range. It's about 40,000 acres, and so there's still these existing fence lines on the WMA. We've had it for about 8 years, and it's kind of an ongoing project to take those fences down, because clearly wildlife get caught in them. They're just kind of a sore on the landscape as far as habitat. But interestingly, wolves actually learn to use fence lines too. You can imagine if you've seen elk move through fences before, a lot of times the calves aren't as quick to jump over the fence. And wolves can catch up to elk and calves pretty easily if they run them into fence lines. So that's another scenario where you'll probably start finding more wolf kills along a fence line that makes it look like gregarious killing. And over the course of a winter, wolves can, if they hone in on an area, they can do some damage.
how are they, because I hear a lot of guys say in Idaho that they've really impacted the elk herds. How has it been in Montana?
That's a great question. And I actually just got done with a conversation with a guy for elk herds. Kind of it's two things per hunters. Obviously the number of elk is an indication of what your success rate is like, but the behavior of elk has changed a bunch too with wolves. So yes, we've got an extra predator on the landscape as far as competing with people. In my area, it's mostly mountain lions and wolves that can do, that take down elk regularly as prey. When elk are first born, black bear are actually a huge predator on neonate elk, so under 2 weeks of age when they're still kind of hunkered down and hiding in the brush. But so it can have an effect on elk numbers, but moreover, I see a change in elk behavior. You won't see them in large groups. They won't be out in the open as much. I've been to Rocky Mountain National Park a couple times, and to me, that's the epitome of an elk that has no predators. They're just out in the open. They're in the parking lot. They don't have a tendency of concern or fear for people, certainly.
We talked about that too when we spoke on the phone, where he said they're going to be in for a surprise, that group in the Rocky Mountain National Park, Estes Park, when they want to reintroduce wolves, because they'd be like, what the hell's going on? This new predator just showed up in town.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that every landscape goes through. A part of this greater North American ecosystem for long time, long before people were ever involved. And now that people are here, it's just changed a lot of the dynamics. When before there were much more plains, lowlands, things like that, but now the public lands of habitat are mountains. And so you have these predators also on these public lands. They're all crunched a little for space. So we do have issues as far as elk distribution. I think one of the issues I run into in the winter, so again, not so much about numbers, but behavior, since the elk have this predator on the public lands, it can increase pressure and bring elk onto private lands, where then it becomes my problem. Like, we're really trying to help landowners coexist with multiple wildlife. And actually elk are a much bigger issue as far as wildlife conflict than wolves or bear are in my area, just because they're literally eating dollar bills out of the haystacks of landowners that have been here. Wolves actually help in dispersing those elk and breaking them up from groups of 500 to groups of 100, which is good, but those elk find refuge on private lands just because the elk get scrutinized there. So I would just, in conclusion, wolves on the landscape are just another challenging variable that hunters, have to deal with, have to try and predict, have to understand as far as, whether it's slope or food or water. It's also where are these elk finding refuge from predators to evade that you can find them.
Has anyone in the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, have they reached out to you guys and gotten as far as how the wolves in your ecosystem have they, are they doing any studies from you guys to how they should reintroduce them if they do?
I think Colorado, we're not the only ones that have had that recovery. Introduced wolves back in the mid 90s to Yellowstone and then Idaho. And there's been piles of different types of studies as far as what it's like when wolves come back to a landscape, whether that's natural prey like elk and deer, or whether it's depredations as far as landowners. Sheep especially have seen some impacts from wolves coming to a new area. But I think Colorado does have a wealth of resources. They're going to face new challenges just because places that I've been, you can gather a lot of general information and some preventative ideas from, even California. That's another place that's recently had wolves come in, and they're trying to figure out their own depredation control methods and what they want the population to be. But specifically, Montana doesn't have all the answers, but they have a lot of resources as far as one interesting one that was actually done by our former wolf specialist, Liz Bradley out of Missoula. They were trying to see what kind of wolf removal methods were actually effective in stopping depredations on livestock. And they found a much higher success when they removed the whole wolf pack, even if it was just a couple of wolves doing it. So that's something that if you're going to spend the time trapping or doing aerial flights to remove problem wolves, you got to remove the whole pack and kind of start over. And then obviously, again, I'm going to keep saying it, it's circumstantial to what zone and what type of private versus public landscape you've got. But there's been several decades now that wildlife agencies and hunters have been able to figure out what it means to have wolves on a landscape. And I think Colorado will have some of its own growing pains, but I hope that there's, in the next 5 or 10 years, there'll be a balance and it'll just be kind of the new way of life.
It's funny you mentioned her study, because I had found a study, I believe it's in Michigan. It's called Killing Wolves to Prevent Predation on Livestock May Protect One Farm but Harm Others. And they concluded too that the lethal removal of wolves, what's it say? Our results do not support the hypothesis that Michigan's use of lethal intervention after wolf depredations was effective for reducing the future risk of reoccurrence in vicinities of trapping sites. And then I think they go on to say that they think that something to her results is to remove the whole pack instead of, because I think they found out that if you just push them onto someone else's property, and then that becomes another problem for the other landowner. So yeah, it's just I think these are wolves in Michigan they were studying. I don't know the PLOS one. I don't know, but yeah, I just happened to find this online.
PLOS one, probably the online kind of journal collections. Yeah, absolutely. It's, Minnesota has always had wolves, basically, even though there was a very small population in the northern section that weren't considered, a sustainable population. They've since recovered to at least 1,000 wolves, if not 2,000 or more. So that's another good place that, especially thinking, Colorado has a lot of public land, which I think can provide some breathing room, both for when it comes to predator conflict and livestock, but it's something that, hunters obviously value that public land as a resource that they can go out and hunt and experience wild places, and wolves being a part of that. Again, it's like, if you're going on a hunt and all of a sudden you get an epic blizzard come your way and you have no visibility, well, having some wolves cruise through the drainage you're working in, that's just another thing that can bust your hunt and make things really tough. So certainly can work around it. I know plenty of hunters that I get a handful every archery season, actually. We've got, you can buy a wolf tag over the counter here, stick it in your back pocket. And so archers, they're quiet. They're sitting in the brush waiting for things to walk by. And I probably tagged 3 wolves this archery season of folks, and they either shot it with their bow or they had a small pistol or handgun that they would harvest the wolf with. So you get to see them. In the summertime, a lot of times they're single. There's not big groups of them, but they can be a cool experience as well. Hearing wolves howl in the wild, it's kind of adds that wilderness aspect. It's like seeing a grizzly track.
Oh, yeah, I want to see a grizzly. Have you seen, because I'm going to backtrack a little bit, because you were talking about and where you can see that the wolves and the grizzlies that are acting, and you see who's on top of the food chart. Have you seen that photograph? It's Grizzly 791, I believe it is. His name's Mark Payton Photography, and I'm trying to get him on here. He's like, I got no stories to tell. I said, dude, all your pictures are your stories. What are you talking about? So I'm slowly working on him, but he's got these pictures in Yellowstone of a bear over a elk kill. And then a wolf comes into the picture, and that wolf is like all posture, kind of submissive. And I don't think I think the only time he got some of the elk was when the grizzly kind of left. But for the most part, that boar was not leaving. I mean, I think he camped out right on top of he's got pictures of him sleeping right on top of the bull elk. And
is that the one that drowned in the river?
Yeah.
Talking about?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's on water.
Those photos were crazy. Like, oh yeah. I don't think I saw the wolf one, but I saw those shots of like this giant grizzly bear on this bull elk and sleeping.
Did you see the shot of the picture of where he was standing for that picture? He showed where with his lens. His lens looks like he's like 20 yards away. He is probably a half mile or more. Crazy. But his lens makes it look like. I had another photographer on here, Scott Stone. He's out of Montana. He said you can spend like 13 grand on a lens to get that kind of picture. Yeah, I'm like, wow. Because I was asking him how you get started, and he starts naming numbers, and I was like, good night. So, how many packs of wolves are there in Montana? Do you guys have an accurate or estimate?
Oh, that's a really good question. I can't say for sure. Almost all of the wolves in Montana are definitely west of the Missouri River, in the mountainous area. And part of that's just because you get a lot more open, flat agricultural prairie once you get past central Montana. Yeah, I know there's stories in the last several years. There was a black wolf that was shot up by Glasgow, I think it was. Just dispersing. Not sure if he came from Canada or Western Montana. Heck, I don't know. Minnesota. Maybe he was coming out west. They're really able to move far, especially those single adults that are just on a mission to find a new home. So you get them traveling through, but I think the established packs that are really pretty consistent for us keeping an eye on and managing are in the northwest and southwest part of the state, especially around Yellowstone too. But I'm not even going to venture a guess. I would guess it's well over 100. In my area, which is 7 hunting districts, elk hunting districts, I've got probably 6 wolf packs. And they're not all entirely in my area. I share them with, boundary biologists. But yeah, there's plenty of wolves. And they've got a lot of space to go with the public lands I have. But yeah.
I remember when I was hunting in Montana and I found some wolf droppings, and I told you about them, where I found them. And you said, yeah, there was a pack in that area up towards the Rock Creek area. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would loved. I didn't hear any. That's the only thing I found in the sign. It was old droppings, but you could tell they were like a dog, So I don't think it was coyote. It was too big to be coyote. And you mentioned earlier about black bears killing wolf cubs, and that's one of the things when I was doing some research before we came on too, is I didn't know black bears were like they'll randomly kill like that. People think they're just berries and nuts, and apparently they go around killing wolf cubs. So I wasn't aware of that until you said that.
Yeah. Well, I intended like for elk calves primarily, but yeah, if they find a den of puppies and they get in there, they'll take them. Basically, bears just like calories. It's amazing how, I'm not as versed on black bear studies or grizzly bear studies, but their diet evolves a bunch. And early on, you can imagine they're really gaunt and hungry when they wake up in the spring. So if they can find some old winter kill or when fawns and calves start dropping in May and June, that is a huge important resource for bears. That's how they really bulk up their strength again. And then a lot of times when you get into July and August, when berries start ripening, they're almost exclusively mowing down on berries and fresh greenery. So it's impressive how generalized they are. They can take advantage of almost any fatty, calorie-filled food.
Oh, I just had a question about wolves, and it just boop. Okay.
Actually, I have an interesting. So something I was talking about recently. Another cool research kind of genre going on in Oregon, Washington, Montana is how wolves and mountain lions interact. And kind of the overall conclusion is that mountain lions kill more often when there's wolves because wolves will take over mountain lion kills. It's not an additive effect overall to more deer and elk dying, but it's interesting to think that, yeah, I mean, a mom with kittens is not going to stick around a carcass if there's a wolf around, but it's kind of, they're right on a level playing field as far as mountain lions will kill wolves and then wolves will kill mountain lions as well. But there's an interesting kind of but connected relationship when you got both those predators on a landscape.
How often do wolves have to eat? Are they pretty consistent every day, or can they go for days or weeks without eating?
They can go weeks. They're a fast famine kind of critter. So their whole metabolism is based on gorging and then not eating again for, I'm not sure how long a wolf can go without eating, but easily over a week without taking anything in. I think that's kind of what comes along the territory of being a large prey predator. So they take down moose. Historically, they took down bison and still do in Yellowstone. And when you have such an immediate, huge source of food, you've got to be able to take advantage of that. But as you said, they have a very low hunting success. So for every hunt they start and fail, it's going to be a while before they get another animal down. So they're really based on feast famine.
And they can run like they're an endurance athlete when it comes to running, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as opposed to like, your mountain lion or bobcats that are really stocky and pounce sneak related. Wolves are just like, they're cross-country runners. They can go forever. Long legs, even in the snow. They're really, really good at taking down prey in the snow.
How far do they travel? Do they have like so now it's winter and obviously game is more concentrated. So they know where things are, right? They obviously know and kind of head to those areas. So do they move to different areas all times of the year?
Yeah, I think in a lot of papers you'll find they often report a summer home range for wolves and a winter home range. A lot of that has to do with just terrain. So if you've got 8 feet of snow and wind drifts at the top of a ridge, it's not as easy to travel around as like saving your energy and staying lower, but also where their food is. I mean, there's no need to be anywhere that the elk can't travel. You got to be where you can consistently find stuff. So yeah, in the wintertime, they're much more concentrated. Obviously, you see wolves a lot more in the winter because you've got the snow, you can see tracks, the contrast of just seeing movement across a white surface. I get lots of wolf reports during the wintertime. And the last few hunting seasons, we haven't had a tremendous amount of snow, so I don't get as much intel until there's snow on the ground as far as archery hunters and rifle hunters seeing wolves. But certainly once there's snow, they realize they're almost everywhere, which is a nice indicator that wolves can be on a landscape and you're not necessarily aware of it. They kind of just want to do their thing and look for gut piles. They'll certainly do that, but yeah, they'll be pretty much around where their food is during the winter. And then in summer, they're all over. And I mentioned that summertime, they're often broken up more, so you won't see a pack as consistently. they're going to have a den site where, that's their home base, and they're going out and foraging for squirrels, they're getting rabbits, they're getting fawns, and carrying that back to the den site and rendezvous sites. So their movements and behaviors are much longer and on a bigger landscape in the summer because of that.
Do they they don't hunt sheep and goats very much, do they? Because it's where they're located. Have there ever been known kills of sheep and goats by wolves?
There have. Again, it's just you got to think of what proportion of wolves overlap with goats or sheep, and that's pretty small. But when I worked in Idaho, we were pretty close to Riggins and McCall. So along the, I think it's the Salmon River where it meets the Snake, really popular rafting area, and there's bighorn sheep populations there. And the office I was working at with the Nez Perce tribe also has a bighorn sheep research group. And they have really cool photos actually of wolves kind of scrambling across this rock landscape pursuing ewes and lambs. You can think I would imagine they probably prefer to pursue sheep when there are small lambs to be had. It's a lot more difficult for wolves to be able to bring down a really large animal on that kind of, the sheep just has the advantage with their,
hell yeah,
and their athleticism. But no, it can definitely happen. Goats, I'm not as sure on, but I'm positive that there's been goats taken down. I can think of places in Washington where there's just a ton of goats. Olympic National Park. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some wolf on goat predation going on.
Do they have, because maybe this is like going back to that learned behavior, do they have a preference, like an elk over a deer or deer over, I don't know, a pronghorn? Now, I doubt they hunt pronghorn very much, but do they have you noticed a preference of certain game animals that wolves tend to go after and kill more than others?
Yeah, that's a good question too. And I think that comes down a little bit to pack size. So for instance, wolves are known to hunt bison in Yellowstone, but that's really only a handful of packs that are even capable of. If you look at studies in Isle Royale, so outside of Michigan, that's almost exclusively moose because that happens to be the predominant ungulate on those islands in that habitat. And certainly around here, there's another interesting balance when it comes to an entire ecosystem in wolves. And I forget the term right now, I should have written it down, but the concept is basically so around here we have a ton of elk. We're over objective. We've got more elk on the landscape than we probably should have. And you think about that as that's an enormous food source for wolves. So wolves will start growing in population as they benefit from this abundance of elk. Say we are successful in getting our elk population down to objective to where it's supposed to be, we still have this surplus of wolves. And what you'll start seeing happen is maybe things like moose or mule deer will actually start to suffer because wolves actually will, maybe this certain pack in Rock Creek really likes to hunt elk, but if we've increased hunting opportunities so that the elk population is lower, that same amount of wolves needs to eat. And so we have to, make sure and consider the fact that our mule deer and moose are going to they're going to cross paths with those wolves more often and become prey. So we could have a secondary effect on that. And in my job, it's kind of helpful that I do manage all those multiple species, so I kind of know what's going on. I haven't had anything like that dramatically happen. If we have a crash in population, it's actually usually related to disease when we have high densities of deer or elk. But yeah, just another thing to consider. But I would say probably around the Northwest, elk is the most popular. For wolves, anyway.
I went and looked at the time we were talking because I'm like thinking maybe I should edit out the part where she says there's an abundance of elk. So in case any hunters are listening, they don't hear that part. Hey, so
you just won't tell them where I work.
yeah. She's in Canada, everyone, way up Northwestern Territories. I was listening to a podcast with Corey Jacobson, and he was talking about he shot a wolf, and Rainey Newberg too mentioned it. And they said wolves smell really bad.
Oh yeah, they
Do
do.
is that because I know I've got a male Rottweiler who's not fixed and he pees everywhere. So they
Yeah.
roll. They roll because they're. I know when they go by scent. Is that because they roll around and piss and everything, or?
Not necessarily. So, yeah, I think for hunters, especially, you think of a big, ripe, stinky bull moose like or elk rolling around in its, in its wonderful smelly pit. Wolves actually, they have, I don't know necessarily why, but they have scent glands both in their paws and at the base of their tail. Not necessarily, their anal glands. Dogs have those too, but you'll always see this dark spot kind of towards the back of their tail, which is also kind of an emitter of scent. I mean, with an animal that's so, the social interactiveness between wolf packs is really interesting, and they're so defined by marking their territory. I think that's part of the reason that they're just so stinky. I don't always notice it, but if it's warm enough, like a lot of times when people bring a wolf to me for me to tag and authorize, they're frozen solid and they don't smell that bad. But if they're, they trapped it the day before and they come in the next day and it's just been in the garage or in their truck, they really stink. It's not necessarily like a skunk stench, but just that musky wild animal kind of thing. I've smelled grizzly bears and black bears up close, especially late in summer. They have kind of an earthy, sweet, mushroomy smell, but if I smell a wolf, it usually doesn't smell great. And I
So
think it's just make it themselves.
with that being said, and they obviously emit a certain scent, are their prey onto that smell? So if they recognize that smell, from a downwind, they know, okay, we got to get it the hell out of Dodge because something's going to happen. Or are wolves smart enough to know and will use the wind to their advantage when they're hunting?
Yeah, without being a wolf, I can't tell you specifically, but I would absolutely expect them, talking about learned behaviors and ways that they can maneuver elk and manipulate them to catch them. I'm sure that wind comes into play for that, whether they want to spook the elk and push them out someplace or whether they're trying to sneak in closer off the backside. I mean, the way they can just endurance run, they run critters to exhaustion to catch them, that I don't think they're often as concerned about staying hidden for as long as opposed to, a cat or something like that is going to be much more discreet and isn't stinky generally. But yeah, I think I don't know specifically, but I wouldn't imagine the scent deters them so much. Certainly when they have that. I've been, in Idaho, my job was to sneak into den sites and rendezvous sites to do counts on adult wolves and juveniles. And when those wolves have been there for 6 weeks, that's obviously something I think deer and elk avoid a bunch. But I've also been watching and observing, waiting to see wolves come out of the trees, and deer and elk walk right by oblivious. And I suppose that's probably to do with the wind. So yeah, the stink I don't think deters them too much from being a good hunter.
So I know when you're out elk hunting or deer, you can smell that musky smell of a buck or a bull. They're in the area.
Yeah.
Do wolves have that? Like, do they have a distinct smell once you recognize it? That smell. Like,
To me, yes. Yeah, I've smelled enough. I, as a person, probably see more than average dead wolves. So my acute sense probably is a little more tuned in. Since I've been in Montana, I haven't hiked anywhere and been able to smell wolves. It's not like that. But if you're in an area, there'll be an occasion. And yeah, they like to mark their territory. If they've got a junction on a trail that they like to defecate or urinate and mark their spot, that can become a stinky spot. It becomes kind of a landmark for all coyotes and other wolves that this is a corner of our territory. And you could probably smell that if you were aware enough to recognize it.
how big is their territory normally? Like average?
Average. Oh, I'm not good at guessing these big numbers. But again, the Rock Creek pack we were talking about, I think has the biggest territory, especially in summer. They're a pretty big pack now. I think they're probably 10 to 12 wolves, and they range, all the way from Anaconda to Phillipsburg, which is, 90 miles, to go all the way over to the other drainage of Rock Creek. And that's just one direction across. And then, so if you do 90 by 90 miles, do the math, and it's pretty big. And I think that's a little bigger than average for my area. I've got a lot of game, and I think wolves, they don't have to travel as far to find food. Whereas if you're in somewhere, Nevada doesn't have wolves yet, but if you think about the landscape in Nevada or Utah, where you get a lot of big, dry, open expanse, and you have to travel quite a ways sometimes, you can expect some really big wolf territory in order for them to find the resources they need to be multiple wolves in a pack.
So ungulates have CWD. Do wolves have any sort of disease that can wipe out a whole population of them?
Yeah, that's a good question, and something I think that's already come up in Colorado. So I know a couple years ago, maybe last year, my sense of time with 2020 has certainly been lost, but there was a rumor going around that wolves increased the spread of CWD. And overall, that's not the case. I mean,
how would that be? How would they spread it?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So two ways, either spreading it by eating a CWD positive animal and then defecating that 100 miles away was one theory. And then I mentioned earlier, in summer, all the way through August, they have rendezvous sites where they're carrying food, regurgitating food for pups to eat. And so in that case, again, a wolf eating a CWD positive animal theoretically could carry that meat to another part of the landscape and infect that landscape. If you're not familiar with chronic wasting disease, it's a prion, so that's different than a virus or bacteria, and it's a particle that can exist on a landscape for years. I don't even know if they know the cap of how long a CWD prion can exist just on the ground on a blade of grass. So when you have tissue being moved around like that, that's where that concern comes. In our big scheme, Montana, we've been managing CWD. We had our first positive sample back in 2017, basically just because we looked really hard and we knew we would find it. But knowing that we have deer and elk on the landscape that are probably living in the same, range as those wolves are very unlikely to spread that tissue anywhere that CWD isn't already. Our big concern is if a hunter comes in, harvests, an elk in Bozeman and then drives to Kalispell with the whole elk in the truck or the gutted elk in the truck. That's our concern, is because that tissue has moved a very far distance that doesn't occur naturally. So, there's only so many things us as wildlife agencies can do to try and slow the progress of CWD or help prevent the spread. And with the minute risk that a wolf carrying a deer leg across, state lines, that's not our concern. It might happen, but not to any bigger degree that it's already happening between bodily fluid exchange between deer and elk.
So I know with my dogs, I would have to get them vaccinated for certain parvo and stuff like that. Do wolves have anything to be concerned about where they could be affected?
Yes, parvo actually, it was probably 10 years ago now. There was a huge outbreak of parvo in wolf packs across Idaho and Montana too, I think. Lots of pups died. So they have their own diseases that they have to deal with. And another thing that was a common concern when I was working in Idaho is the tapeworm that they can carry. So typical life cycle of a tapeworm, we'll start with the egg. The eggs are on the ground, are ingested by an elk or a cow or a sheep or some sort of, grazer. And then a wolf or mountain lion or something eats that elk and ingests the cysts. I mean, some hunters, I'm sure, have cut into elk or something and found these cysts actually in the meat, or especially in the lung tissue, you'll find them. And that's basically where these tapeworms reside. And then when a wolf or a mountain lion or a carnivore or a person ingest these cysts, they have that tapeworm. And so this tapeworm is adapted to wolves, specifically this species. So it's a natural cycle. It doesn't harm the wolf, and it really doesn't harm the host of the elk much either. But when people ingest it, it can cause a lot of problems because that cyst will go and embed itself somewhere, whether it's an organ or a tissue, and it's not designed to be in human beings. I think there have been historically a few cases of that happening where someone was messing around with wolf feces typically and accidentally, did hands, ingested it. I mean, that's the thing, right? Don't play with wolf poop and you'll pretty much be okay. But yeah, so that's another thing that as far as disease goes, very small sample size of risk, but that's another thing that wolves do carry. It's a natural parasite for them.
So back to the whole controversy with hunter stuff. Do we as hunters have to be really concerned about elk affecting like greatly? Because I mean, sometimes I've heard, and I understand social media. You see some posts and you think the entire population of elk was wiped out. But then I got advice from a guy. He's going to come on here actually, and he's a good elk hunter and stuff. He said, you know what? They just get smart, the elk, and they don't bugle as much. And so it seems like there's no elk in the area. So are they a concern, like as far as like, could they take out a shit ton of elk if they really wanted to affect the whole population of elk?
I really don't think so. I mean, it depends on what you mean by the word affect. Definitely in any wildlife population, there's ebbs and flows, if you will, or ups and downs as far as growth and decline, whether it's predators, really hard winters, disease, like I mentioned, that's a natural cycle. So I think hunters can also relate to the fact that even if there's not predators on the landscape, some years have more elk than others. Some weather allows access to more elk than others. And I think wolves, never say never, but in the long-term millennia that they've been in North America existing with their prey, they haven't driven anything to extinction that's been shown by science. And that's an important part too, where, wolves and mountain lions and things like that, because we've scrunched everything in to this public lands, super small range compared to what they used to have. Humans have a role now to help balance out what those predators, what's on the landscape. I hate it when people think that we're above or outside of, natural cycles. We're absolutely a part of it, for better, for worse. But for hunters out there, they're a big part of managing these elk herds, and wolves are too, and they play a part in keeping wolf populations at a pace. And if there's sick or old wolves out there, they get removed by hunters more likely than not, or trappers, I should say. But yeah, I don't see wolves posing any detrimental threat. You will go through a painful learning curve of the elk adapting to it. You're going to see new behaviors. Elk might be more quiet, or they might just be less inclined to respond to calls, I think is something that happens. Just because, it's not like wolves are, bugling elk in or anything, but they just become more wary. They've got to keep their head on a swivel, so they just become a much more difficult hunt because they've got lots of things to worry about, not just, a person walking through or anything like that. So behaviorally, yeah, it's going to change the hunting dynamic, I think, for a lot of people in Colorado.
So as far as hunting wolves in Montana, I guess this is a two-part question. First part is there a quota you'd like to see for certain, like Rock Creek, for example? Is there a certain number of wolves you want to keep it to maintain? And then I guess the follow-up is, you talked about the elk right now are over, what'd you say they were? Over abundance?
Objective.
Yeah, over objective. So do you decrease the number of wolves that are killed to help maintain, so they can kind of help balance out along with the hunters, the elk population, so they maintain, they're not over objective?
That's a good question. Yeah, ultimately it comes down to the fact that people aren't super effective at harvesting wolves. I've got 2 or 3 trappers that I'm actually checking a wolf tomorrow for a guy that just got another one. It'll be his 4th wolf this year. There's not a whole lot of people that know the terrain, know the wolf behavior, have the skill to do it consistently. Not to say that you can't learn. Montana actually requires you take a trapping course in the state before you get your trapping license, and a lot of it leans on safely trapping wolves in order to avoid bycatch, which is a big thing. We don't want you catching mountain lions or bobcats or things that you aren't intended to. And also where there's grizzly bears, it's a huge concern if anyone's trying to foothold trap wolves. And that's a big reason why our trapping season doesn't start till December 1st, just to limit the chances that grizzly bears are on the landscape when trappers are trying to trap. So if, folks were more successful, a variety of people were more successful in harvesting more wolves, then yeah, we could run quotas and increase it, decrease it, but there might be a cap for my area as far as when we reach a certain limit of wolves harvested, we might close the season, but we've never gotten to it. It's something where if you find a wolf, you're welcome to harvest it. There's no limit around here. The only limits are around Yellowstone National Park. There's a couple hunting districts on the border where there's more controversy as far as those national park wolves, which are considered kind of a national treasure in this closed bubble. And they do leave the park in the winter because their food does. And there's a limit of only 2 or 3 wolves in some of those districts, and they will close the hunting season. So there's no real increase or decrease of wolf harvest. It's just as many as, folks can get.
Why do you think there's such a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like lashing out at people who do harvest wolves. Another example, Corey Jacobson, when he was talking about, he shot a wolf, and he said he just said he deleted all the comments because, you get all these people who just think wolves are these, Disney ruined it for a lot of people. I don't think people understand that, you want to keep these animals alive, but eventually if you don't do anything, they're going to eventually encroach into human. And then what are you going to do? They're going to, where we congregate more often, and people see them in Yellowstone, like you said, it's all cute and everything, but these things can fuck you up. I mean, not saying they're going to hunt humans, but why do you think people have such animosity towards someone who kills a wolf or a mountain? It always seems to be the prey animals. Wolves, bears, mountain lions get such hate and vitriol from, I guess you'd say, anti-hunters or animal lovers. And why do you think that is? And I don't know. They're not pets.
Yeah. That is an excellent question that I think you can find sociology studies even, as far as, you think of the classic term, charismatic megafauna, and that comes to panda bears or wolves, tigers. These are all things that people, they're really impressive, incredible animals that are a treasure to have in the world, right? It is super cool to know that, if you're hiking in the wilderness, there's grizzly bears out there, this enormous creature. It's something that I think a lot of people find a romantic connection with. And to the degree, thinking about Colorado and that vote that went through for wolf reintroduction, I think there's a lot of folks, of course, that live in these areas that actually interact with wolves, and they have a more realistic, less fantasy version, right? They're trying to make a living with sheep or livestock, and they're already having a hard time with beef prices, or they're having a hard time with drought, and adding wolves to that equation is really tough. That's not even just like a pet peeve or a bully thing. That's a tangible negative to those folks that are living on the outskirts of some of these wilder areas. And then obviously the changes that come with, when you're trying to hunt elk, and how different it is when you've got wolves that are pushing the elk around too. And And, you know, I grew up in Oklahoma. Obviously, there weren't wolves there. And yet you can find vast opinions of wolves in Oklahoma, even though nobody there has even seen one. And you'll get the same thing. You'll get people that think they're, you know, this idolized spirit animal. You know, I think wolves with their, you know, kind of romanticized family connection, you know, their teamwork animal. Wolves are also incredibly brutal. Wolves, you know, when you look at how wolves die, a lot of the times it's by other wolves. They don't live peaceful lives. They usually don't live past the age of 10, much less the age of 6 or 8, just because their lives are very tough and violent. Yeah, and then you think about White Fang and things like that that make them out to be this heroic creature. Or even, you know, there's the whole wolves change rivers video. There's like a sliver of truth to that as far as willows recovering in Yellowstone. You know, the wolves ate the elk and the willows grew and then the beavers came back and the fish came back. But there's a much larger picture than that. Wolves come with challenges as well. But I think it's so much easier when you see a wolf in a zoo, or you see a movie about a wolf, or you see these really cool epic photos like we were talking about earlier. For people who have never thought about the reality of living with wolves, it's an amazing thing to be caught up with. You think of people, they've got tattoos, they've got t-shirts, they've got all this badass stuff, and it's just kind of this human personification of a wild animal. I can't explain the full details why. Clearly, Colorado's, they've got their rural population that is in the overlap of wildlife like wolves and things like that. And then there's, you know, your Denver, your eastern side of Colorado that are really excited about this. And I certainly feel like I'm in the stream of both ways. Like, I really think it's cool that I can go out and hike and I can potentially hear a wolf or find a track or see stuff like that. But yeah, I'm glad I'm not trying to make a living in a place with wolves because it's tough. So I don't have the full answer to that. I think there's plenty of research we can all try and figure out, from California to Oregon, Washington, places where voting especially can lean towards these, you know, typically urban areas where people don't interact with wildlife.
Right.
See them as part of a fluffy landscape to enjoy the outdoors. People enjoy the outdoors in a lot of different ways. And when you're, yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. It's complex, but that's kind of what my experience has been.
They are killing machines. I think, and you remind me where you're talking about people in urban areas. It's the same with people who are against eating meat, and they get on your ass when you post, or they find out you're a hunter. I've had backlash. People just find out I'm a hunter. They immediately assume I'm just killing things.
Yeah.
That they'll go to the grocery store and have no qualms about going to the meat section because they're disassociated in how that animal got there. It's there in a package.
Oh, yeah.
No worries. Just like I buy my box of Ritz crackers, there's my packaged meat. No worries. But I think have you seen, to sum it up, the best video to describe a wolf I saw? I don't know where it was taken, but it was a night camera, like from someone's home.
Mm-hmm.
And it was wintertime, and there were 2 pet dogs, and they go running out. And I think there was a gate and there were some vehicles, and you see the eyes. And then there's probably, let's say, 3 or 4 wolves that come, and you get to see the devolution of the wolf to domesticated dog. They fucked these 2 dogs up. I mean, these 2 dogs went and tried to fight them, and then all of a sudden one wolf came, and then next thing you know, they're just swarmed by wolves. And it was the end of the dogs. So people think they're all cute and everything. Just go take little Fluffy and go see if it'll commingle with the wolves and say goodbye to Fluffy and get the, you know, it's a pretty graphic video, but it just kind of shows you, you know, what dogs used to be like. And we domesticated them. And now they're from killing machine to man's best friend when, you know, they can, it's a really
That's
good
a
video.
really, I mean, you're absolutely right. And it's amazing we brought the wolf down to little Fluffy and Yorkies and all these Chihuahuas and stuff, right? And an interesting thing, so another thing we haven't talked about yet is the whole when they brought wolves to Yellowstone, they came from Canada. They're these mutant mega wolves, right, that weren't native here. And I think to some extent that could be true. Like talking about Mexican gray wolves, they're fairly easy to describe subspecies. They're much smaller. They just live in a different area. It's a much warmer temperature, so there's that whole latitude change where the farther north you get, the bigger body mass you typically have. So northern wolves are probably bigger. But as far as their function here, it's been the same. But one interesting thing I will point out, and it's been documented in several places, especially where wolves are kind of reestablishing and there may not be a whole lot of other wolves to meet up with and mate, you get domestic dog wolf breeding. And there's been a few times in Idaho, there's been cases in Washington where they'll have a wild wolf with hybrid puppies, and they'll have to exterminate those puppies, mainly because when you start mixing up those genes, you know, some of the listeners, or maybe you may be familiar if you've ever met a wolf dog. Some can be super sweet, domestic, loyal, no big deal, but they're always going to have that wild gene in them, and they can turn and snap, and they're so strong.
I've heard stories about that.
Yeah, and so you get that same, like you're rolling the dice when you have animals like that in the landscape. And one of the reasons there's more black wolves is because there's been some domestic dog integration into some of the gene pool in some areas. You know, black wolves weren't, you know, as far as history recalls, they weren't as much of a thing. And, you know, people talk about, you know, the black wolves carrying, that's a new thing. That's evidence of this mutant Canada mega wolf, but it's just another effect from wolves and people living in close coordinates. Those things are going to interact, and that's one way they do. Granted, there's a very minute amount of any dog DNA, I think, out there, but you can imagine that maybe that type, a wolf that is a hybrid, is going to have less fear of a human, perhaps, but it's still going to be a wolf at heart. So they may be more willing to venture into some scenarios on private land or experiment a little more when they're young, and that's where you might come into problems. So yeah, that's just another interesting effect of when people and wildlife coexist.
How does a domestic dog breed with a wolf? Because obviously the female is giving off the scent, and they're a gregarious animal, so she's with a pack. How does that happen where a domestic dog can infiltrate and not get fucked up by the pack?
Sure.
To breed a female.
Dispersing. Yeah, so these are going to be dispersing individuals. So I kind of mentioned earlier how, you know, certain wolves, when they hit 2 or 3 years old, they get this urge to leave. You know, that's kind of an evolutionary advantage. You don't want to stick around and breed with your own family. So this urge to leave and find, you know, another animal to mate with and develop your own pack, that's really ingrained into wolves. Not all of them leave a pack, but definitely males will, for sure. And so that's where you maybe find this dispersing female wolf who has traveled all the way into Washington, and she's coming into heat, and she's trying to smell out a partner, and the closest she can find is a Great Pyrenees dog, or, you know, it's typically, you know, one of those larger breed dogs that live outside on a landscape permanently, which is ironic because Pyrenees are livestock guardian dogs. But yeah, I think that's typically been the case, is you'll get hybrids with these big kind of wild dog breeds that are meant to live outside independently. And when a female wolf, or, you know, I don't know to what extent male wolves react to dogs in heat. I'm sure that might happen too, but I think that urge to reproduce, and if you don't have better options, yeah, that becomes.
Take what you get.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like last call at the bar, and you're just like, okay, I'm taking you. So yeah. No.
Yep. Good enough.
So, like, technically, a female wolf could get bred, and she could just start her own pack. Like, she could venture off somewhere and then create a whole new pack just by having a litter, and then go from there. Huh.
Yep. And that's interesting. So aside from breeding with dogs when I was in Idaho, I was there from 2011 to 2013, I think was my last year there as a wolf biologist. And so they delisted wolves the first time. They delisted, relisted, delisted again. It was this whole political thing. But the first season they had on wolves, it was the same thing. Wolves were really naive. They had never had to worry about getting shot or, coming into gut piles or investigating old campsites, things like that. They never had consequences. But that first season, it disrupted a ton of packs. So you harvest certain individuals from certain packs. They do have complex social arrangements as far as, omega, beta, alpha, all that kind of thing. And sometimes when you remove a wolf from a pack, the whole family system falls apart and everyone breaks off and then will start breeding, separately. They'll find a new mate. They'll start a new pack. So some of these areas that had, a decade or more of this consistent area for a den site, we weren't finding the wolves there anymore. They were going to these new locations. They weren't with their normal group. It just kind of threw the whole, wolf population behavior, just really randomized everything because, it changes a lot of things when if your alpha female gets taken out or, all your friends get taken out and you're on your own. And I don't know to what effect it's like now since, hunting, I should say trapping. Trapping is obviously much more effective for wolf harvest than hunting is, but yeah, that comes with it too. And I think things have balanced out now. Wolves are much more wary of people and harder to catch and things like that. But yeah, it's just another part of it.
So wolf season's all year round, Montana. Then is that right? Is that what I
Not
understood?
technically. Well,
Okay.
I will say, that's a good question. For as far as shooting a wolf, I think it starts in August. For trapping wolves, I think it's December 1st. And then it ends March 15th right now. Is like the end of the trapping season. And that's for epics and fair chase. I can imagine people might feel the need to want to go in and set up a bunch of traps outside of a den and catch and kill every wolf that comes in there. But I think Montana, we really do prioritize fair chase. We don't want to just go in and annihilate any animal. There's actually a legislative measure to propose making wolves predators, which would make them more like coyotes, where coyotes clearly you can just harvest as needed. And there's a lot of proponents against that. It'll be interesting to see where things end up. But for now, yeah, wolves are managed that it's pretty much open season from August to March. And then when breeding season starts, we back off.
Nice. Cool. That's all I got. I think people are going to be very educated because I know I just learned a lot and this was very cool. I'm glad you came on.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, wolves are one of those things where there is so much passion poured into it, whether it's love them or hate them, but they're just another wild animal. To me, it was great when they got delisted and then just became part of the overall, management of wildlife for the states to take control of. That was a really good thing. And I think Colorado will get there and it'll be old news here in another 10 years, I hope.
Well, I can't wait to eventually interact with them once I get up to Montana. I'm looking forward to that too.
We'll
Sweet.
see.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, David. Always is.
I know. And finally to actually get to see each other instead of just through email and stuff, right? Now, let me ask you this.
Totally.
Because I'll post a little thing on my Instagram, like I'll do a little double picture between you and I and stuff and just say you're going to be coming on. Do you want me to post your Instagram handle or you want me to just say Montana Parks and Wildlife Biologist? Because I don't know how people, I don't want you to get people bothering you saying, how dare you say wolves, this or that, So.
Yeah, probably not. I don't really have like a professional profile to follow. There's so many opinions out there. I don't feel like mine needs to be part of the overall discussion, but you can certainly tag my email in there for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks if people want to talk about wolves.
I'll just do the Montana fish because that's what I did. I had the Pennsylvania elk guy on yesterday, the biologist, and I asked him if he wanted me to do his personal or he said just do Pennsylvania Game Commission. So that's all I put because I don't want I'm sure he didn't want to he's representing them, so he just wanted to speak on their behalf. So and that was
Oh,
a cool
sure.
interview too. So
I mean, if people want to see pictures of my dogs, I mean, that's what it's all about on Instagram. My dogs, and I've got a couple fish tanks. So
speaking of pictures, if you have any like, because I know you sent me some of those wolf and grizzly pictures. If you have any more, because I make these cool trailers, you gotta check it out.
oh yeah.
Just to
And I can
promote
send you some stuff to link under the podcast link, maybe some of the things we talked about. if people
Okay.
wanna read.
Yeah, cool. And because I'll put it like a little minute trailer with like rock music, and I get it from iMovies. It's pretty cool. I've made some, and but if you have any like short little clips of video, like short, because it's only like a minute long, where I could just kind of cut and paste little pieces of wolves, or even just the pictures are fine. Just so I can, and I'll put you and I, and then I'll throw in some pictures of wolves and stuff in there. So
Sure. Yeah, I'll send some your way. See what you can come up with.
awesome. Thanks, Julie.
Awesome. Hope everyone has a good day.
Roger. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.